10 secrets behind Clara Stone's obsession mask. In the heart of the bustling metropolis, where neon lights clashed against eternal shadows, whispers of a new predator sent shivers through the city's underbelly. He was not an ordinary criminal. He was a ghost, a shadow, a name that lingered on lips like a forbidden secret. His victims knew him not by sight, but by the meticulous symbols he left behind. The veiled artist, a name as enigmatic as the man himself. Detective Clara Stone, the city's relentless investigator, found herself drawn once again into a labyrinth of puzzles and provocations, this time orchestrated by a mind as brilliant as it was dark. But while her last encounter with the infamous gentleman killer had left her scarred, this new adversary seemed determined to do more than challenge her. It sought to redefine her. It began with the discovery of a gallery hidden beneath an abandoned theatre. A wealthy socialite had gone missing, only for her body to reappear days later, positioned delicately in the gallery's centre, surrounded by paintings that seemed to weep in the dim light. The walls were adorned with scenes of suffering, each stroke of paint vivid and lifelike, as though the canvases themselves bore witness to pain. Clara stepped cautiously into the scene, her flashlight revealing what words could not. The woman was posed as the centerpiece, her body transformed into art, painted with meticulous detail, her expression frozen in sorrowful ecstasy. At her feet lay a note, written in silver ink on black parchment. True art demands sacrifice. Will you join the exhibition, detective? As Clara dove deeper, she found herself ensnared in a chilling web of connections. The paintings were not mere works of art. They were histories, each depicting a tragedy from the victim's life. Through interviews and autopsies, Clara unraveled the truth. The veiled artist knew his victims intimately, drawing inspiration from their darkest secrets. The second victim, a renowned pianist, was discovered in his penthouse, his fingers meticulously severed and arranged on piano keys to form an eerie melody. The composition was left incomplete, with another note: "Every masterpiece requires a muse. Do you dare finish it?" Clara was no stranger to obsession, but this was different. The veiled artist wasn't merely taunting her, he was collaborating with her. For every piece of his gallery, she became an unwilling critic, her insights shaping his next creation. The deeper she ventured, the more she felt like an accomplice rather than an adversary. Through fragments of evidence and whispers in the criminal underworld, Clara unearthed a name: Elias Marrow, a reclusive artist whose works once captivated galleries across Europe. A tragic fire had destroyed his studio, killing his family and leaving him disfigured. Many believed him dead, but Clara recognized his signature in the veiled artist's work, a mastery of shadows and light, of beauty born from despair. Determined to confront him, Clara followed a trail of cryptic invitations to an abandoned mansion on the city's outskirts. The house was a decaying masterpiece, its walls adorned with Elias's forgotten paintings. At its heart lay a grand hall, illuminated by flickering chandeliers, where the veiled artist awaited her. Draped in a cloak of black velvet, his face concealed by an ornate mask, Elias greeted her like an old friend. "Detective Stone," he said, his voice smooth and haunting. "You've seen my work. Do you understand it now?" Clara clenched her fists, her mind racing. "You're a murderer, Elias. There's no art in death." He laughed softly, gesturing to the room around them. "And yet you're here, drawn to the beauty of it all, despite yourself. Tell me, Clara, how far would you go to create something eternal?" Elias revealed his ultimate masterpiece, a life-sized painting of Clara, surrounded by scenes of her victories and failures, her triumphs and regrets. It was hauntingly accurate, as though he had lived every moment alongside her. "You've inspired me, detective," he said, "but the final stroke requires your hand." He handed her a brush, its tip coated in blood-red paint. "Complete it, and I'll surrender. Refuse, and the canvas remains unfinished, along with our story." Clara's hands trembled as she held the brush. She had spent her career fighting darkness, but in this moment, she felt its seductive pull. The painting was more than art, it was a mirror, reflecting the parts of herself she had tried to bury. She knew that finishing it would mean stepping into Elias's world, becoming a part of his twisted legacy. But she also knew that letting him walk away would mean more lives lost. With a steady hand, Clara made her choice, dragging the brush across the canvas in a single deliberate stroke. The room seemed to exhale as Elias removed his mask, revealing a face both scarred and serene. "Beautiful," he whispered, before raising his hands in surrender. As officers stormed the mansion, Elias allowed himself to be taken, his gaze never leaving Clara. "You've completed my masterpiece," he said as they led him away. "But remember, detective, true art is immortal." The city hailed Clara as a hero, but she felt anything but victorious. Elias Marrow was behind bars, yet his voice lingered in her mind, his words echoing in the silence of her apartment. Late at night, she would find herself staring at the unfinished painting, wondering if she had truly captured the darkness, or if it had captured her. And in the quiet corners of the city, whispers of a new artist began to surface, one inspired by the legend of the veiled artist. Because, as Clara now understood, some shadows never fade. Weeks turned into months, and while the city appeared to move on, Clara couldn't escape the weight of Elias Marrow's words or his gaze. His haunting eyes, so full of twisted admiration, visited her in her dreams. Every case she took on afterwards seemed to echo his legacy, the same careful attention to detail, the same whispers of a message just for her. One evening, while sifting through old case files, she found an envelope tucked into the folds of her desk drawer. It hadn't been there before. Her heart raced as she opened it, revealing a small, hand-painted card. On the card was an image of a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a different moment of her life. Beneath the image were just 2 words: "Look closer." Disturbed, Clara examined the card under her desk lamp. The brushstrokes were unmistakably Elias's, yet he had been imprisoned in a high-security facility for months. How could he have sent this? Was it a copycat? Or had he orchestrated this long before his capture? The card's reverse side contained a cryptic riddle. "Through fractured glass, truth shall gleam. In shadows lies the final scheme." The message led Clara to revisit Elias's gallery of crime scenes. Each one felt different now, less like a memory and more like an unfinished conversation. She found herself drawn back to the abandoned mansion where she had confronted him, a place she had sworn never to return to. This time, it felt alive, as though it were breathing in anticipation. Inside the mansion, Clara found the painting Elias had created of her, now covered in a sheet. As she hesitated, she noticed something new. A fresh canvas stood beside it, blank, but for a single stroke of crimson paint down the center. A small, antique box rested on a pedestal before it, its lid slightly ajar. Inside the box was a tape recorder and a single handwritten note. "Every artist needs a muse, and every muse a successor. Press play." Clara's fingers trembled as she pressed the button on the recorder. Elias's voice filled the room, calm and deliberate, as if he were standing right beside her. "Art is eternal, Clara, but so are you. I chose you not just for your mind, but for the beauty of your struggle, the way you see the world, the way you feel its weight."
"You've finished my masterpiece, but now it's time for you to create your own." The recording ended with a soft laugh, and the room plunged into silence. Clara stared at the blank canvas, the brush lying temptingly nearby. A part of her wanted to destroy it, to burn the mansion and everything in it to ashes. But another part of her, a darker, quieter part, was tempted. Elias had seen something in her that no one else ever had, and his words echoed in her mind. "You can't escape what you truly are." The rational side of her screamed to leave, to walk away and never look back. But her hand betrayed her, reaching for the brush. The moment she touched it, she felt an unsettling clarity, as though a veil had been lifted from her mind. She understood now why Elias had chosen her, why his work resonated so deeply with her. She dipped the brush into the crimson paint and raised it to the canvas. Clara didn't remember how long she spent in the mansion that night. Hours? Days? When she finally emerged, the painting was complete, its surface a chaotic yet mesmerizing reflection of her inner turmoil. She left it there, hidden in the shadows of the mansion, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the last time she'd pick up a brush. As the weeks passed, Clara threw herself into her work, solving cases with a newfound intensity. But something had changed. Her colleagues noticed her sharper focus, her heightened attention to detail. It was as if she could see into the minds of the criminals she hunted, predicting their moves with uncanny precision. But late at night, in the quiet of her apartment, she would catch herself sketching on scraps of paper, her lines growing darker and more intricate. And each time, she would think of Elias, his voice a constant whisper in the back of her mind. Months later, the city was rocked by a chilling discovery, a series of crime scenes, each more elaborate and haunting than the last. The press dubbed the new artist the Heir, speculating that Elias Marrow had somehow found an accomplice. Clara read the reports with a sinking feeling in her chest, her hands tightening around the newspaper. The descriptions were too familiar. The symbolism, the precision, the hidden messages. It was as if Elias himself had returned. But deep down, Clara knew the truth. The Heir wasn't someone new, it was her. The shadows had claimed her, just as Elias had predicted. And now, she walked a fine line between justice and obsession, her legacy unfolding with every stroke of the brush. Clara stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her apartment, her mind a tempest of conflicting emotions. She had spent her career chasing monsters, but now she couldn't escape the truth. She had become one. Every choice she had made since meeting Elias seemed to lead her to this moment. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, but a small voice inside whispered that this was always meant to be. The latest crime scenes, while disturbingly familiar, had also introduced a new element, a sense of rebellion against Elias's methods. They weren't just tributes to his style, but deliberate deviations, each piece carrying a dual meaning. Clara was both honoring and defying her predecessor, crafting a story that only she could tell. Yet the deeper she sank into this duality, the more she struggled to hold on to her humanity. Each night brought vivid dreams of Elias, his voice guiding her hands as she worked, his presence as tangible as if he was standing beside her. She began to question whether she was truly free or just another creation of his, a puppet dancing on the strings of his legacy. Detective Marcus Reed, a rising star in the precinct, was assigned to the case of the Heir. Young, idealistic and driven, Marcus idolized Clara Stone and saw her as a mentor. He had no idea of her connection to the crimes that haunted the city. "Detective Stone," Marcus said one morning, entering her office with a folder under his arm. "The Heir's work. It feels different from Marrow's. There's something personal about it, like they're trying to say something." Clara stiffened, carefully masking her reaction. "Go on," she said, her voice steady. Marcus spread out photographs of the scenes across her desk. "See here," he pointed, "the symbols in the latest scene. They're more erratic, less controlled than Marrow's. It's almost like they're in conflict with themselves." Clara examined the photos, her heart pounding.
He was right. The symbols were a reflection of her internal struggle, a battle between the darkness Elias had awakened in her and the light she was desperately trying to hold on to. "I think they're trying to leave a message," Marcus continued, his brow furrowed. "Something about redemption, maybe? Or a warning?" Clara nodded slowly, her mind racing. Marcus was closer to the truth than he realized, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he uncovered her secret. One night, Clara returned to the abandoned mansion where it had all begun. She needed answers, closure, something to silence the storm inside her. The painting she had left behind was still there, now covered in dust and cobwebs, yet its power over her hadn't diminished. As she stood before it, a voice echoed through the empty halls. "You've come back, Clara. I knew you would." She spun around, her heart racing. It wasn't possible. Elias was locked away, confined to a prison cell. Yet there he stood, his presence as commanding as ever. "This isn't real," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not here." "Am I not?" he replied, stepping closer. "Or have I always been here in the corners of your mind, guiding you?" Clara clenched her fists. "You don't control me." Elias tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Don't I? Look at what you've created, Clara. You've taken my work and made it your own. But the question remains, why? Are you seeking justice, or have you finally embraced the darkness?" Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "I didn't choose this. You did this to me." He laughed softly, the sound echoing in the vast room. "Oh, Clara, I merely opened the door. You were the one who stepped through." As his image faded into the shadows, Clara sank to her knees, the weight of his words crushing her. She realized she couldn't keep running from herself. If she wanted to reclaim her life, she would have to confront the darkness head-on. Clara made a decision that night. She would leave a message for Marcus, a trail of clues that only he could follow. If anyone could stop her spiral into darkness, it was him. She crafted one final crime scene, a twisted masterpiece that mirrored her internal conflict, a figure split down the middle, one half bathed in light and the other shrouded in shadow. She left a letter for Marcus at the scene, confessing her role as the heir and explaining the hold Elias had over her. She begged him to understand, to see her not as a monster, but as someone struggling to find their way back to the light. As dawn broke over the city, Clara stood on the rooftop of the precinct, watching as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the darkness. She felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that her story was finally out of her hands. Marcus found the letter and pieced together the truth. Shocked and heartbroken, he vowed to honor Clara's wish to stop her descent into darkness. He worked tirelessly to uncover the full extent of Elias's influence and bring justice to the victims of both the past and present. As for Clara, she disappeared from the city, leaving behind her badge and her past. Some say she started a new life, using her knowledge to help those in need. Others believe she continued her work in the shadows, a force for justice that the world would never see. But one thing was certain, the legend of Clara Stone, the detective who danced with darkness, would never be forgotten.